ni quasquanatis ashton qua I quiqualoan e squaloan at tamuch at pankupa ni metale stakaya na sitlash heights ep ewish se heights ep. So in my language I just said that I have good feelings that you've all gathered here today in Zoom. And I also acknowledged where I'm at is in Vancouver. And I acknowledged the ancestors of the Musqueam people, the Squamish people, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. And I acknowledged our ancestors for the understanding and the feelings that they had for this land here. And I also said, acknowledging one of my ancestors who descended from a wolf. And I want to share a song of thanksgiving to the earth and to everything that we take from the earth. Oh, Lord. Thank you again. That was a nature song, part of one of my family's songs. It's a song of gratitude to all of creation and to the life givers as well, those that can give life. And I'm grateful to be here today, to be a part of this. Thank you, Ross.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting how powerful the welcome is and how much it grounds me. Like I remember like the experience, especially from sharing it with you in person. And I'm glad it has, I can feel the impact it has on me. It grounds me listening to it. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you. I just wanted to quickly just acknowledge a couple of other things tonight before I completed the introductions, is that Jess Helsley from the Healthsick Nation was going to join us, but their community is dealing with COVID, and so they're focusing on obviously looking after the community. And then also Eric Holt from the Nez Perce was going to join us, and his nation and his family have been involved in wolf reintroduction in their lands and territories, and unfortunately that they're dealing with a loss in the family. So we just send our best wishes to Jess and Eric and to their communities and their families. So I also wanted to just, Gabe, I'm just kind of going through my notes here, just also introduce you in terms of your role, like that you're born and raised in North Vancouver on I guess what is called Barad Inlet Indian Reserve and Tsleil-Waututh Nations community, and that, you know, as people can probably see, that you've served your community as manager of culture and language, and you're now working as director of treaty lands and resources. And then I also wanted to welcome Gisele Maria Martin from, now speaking before with Gisele about, I'm going to try and risk a better approximation of how I can pronounce your nation. So here goes, from the Clayoquat Nation.
Tla-o-qui-aht.
Like, sorry, I butchered that, but I had to at least like respectfully attempt a more accurate way of pronouncing your nation. So thanks for helping me with that and being patient. And Gisele is a member of that nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and a Nuu-chah-nulth language and culture activist, educator, and artist. And Gisele, like, I just also wanted to extend that opportunity to you. If you feel you want to acknowledge where you're calling in from, then I welcome you to do that if you want to do that and you feel that's appropriate.
Na atahit chani uklasis tla-o-quis daxus tla-o-qui-aht hisakwistas mahti ihozat hils tla-hu-yi snanaimoch nisma snanaimoch hahuthi Echap mahsas aku uxchiin. My name's Tla-o-qui. I'm also called Gisele. I'm from the House of Ihosat from Tla-o-qui-aht Nation, and I'm right now visiting Snuneymuxw territory for the day. So I'm in my car, and I just want to put out some energy to raise up those who've lost loved ones today. And yeah, thank you for inviting me here.
Thanks for joining us. I love it. So kind of dynamic, and you both make the effort. I really appreciate that. So I had a few different kind of broad questions that I wanted to, like, I'm curious to learn from more about both of you. If, like, I'm just kind of, obviously wolves are like one of these populations that's hugely popular, used in iconography all around the world for so many different things, right? Even part of the reason literally why motivated my own visit and, you know, movement from northwest of England, where wolves were extirpated hundreds of years ago, to British Columbia to work with the Raincoast, because I was so passionate about wolves. But I was kind of curious to hear from each of you, if you could give us a sense like of your own relationship to the wolf, and you know, how that relates to your own identity or the identity of your family and nation. And I invite either of you to, I guess I'll just rely on my Britishness and maybe invite Gisele, you to go first if you're open to that, just sharing a little bit more about like your own relationship to the wolf and what they mean for you.
Oh, I feel like it's a really old story. Our families can trace back quite a few generations, many generations, and the stories get really old really quickly. But even beyond that, it gets into geological events in this part of the world, climate change, stories about the last ice age, stories about the Great Flood that covered the whole world, which nations had their canoes tied to which mountains, anchored. And even before that, the stories go further. They go into the supernatural age, where all family of life is one big family. And we were once able to communicate amongst each other easily. But as time went by, we've kind of solidified into the forms and the beings that we are today. And there was a lot more shape-shifting, even some generations back. And unless we really listen with our hearts today, we cannot understand one another. And there's an old story that comes from that time in the supernatural age of some of our human ancestry arriving in our homelands, and how we were in a way adopted and tamed by the family of life that hosts us on this planet. and how we were born naked. We have no canine teeth. We have no fur to keep us warm. We have no blubber like whales or seals. We have no claws. You know, we're kind of like these naked beings that don't have the tools that we need. And so the whole family of life donated to us to help us live here. And they still provide all the material things that we need for our tools and our clothing and our food and everything. But beyond that, it's not just about the material things. The most important things that we have received, the most important gifts, are the teachings about life and how to live in this world, the roles that we have as human beings. And every plant, every animal, the air, the water, the fire, the land, it all has special roles in that family of life. And human beings are not exempt from that. And one of our strengths is the power of manifestation and what we hold in our hearts and our visions. But with that, you know, there's really, really strong teachings in connection with that, with the wolves. The wolves are some of our oldest teachers, and they still demonstrate to this day the natural law. They are like the law keepers. Learning about Tla-o-qui-aht, we call them Tla-o-qui-aht. First, when I started learning our language, about 10 years ago, I learned the word Tla-o-qui-aht before that, but I thought, okay, Tla-o-qui-aht means wolf. Wolf means Tla-o-qui-aht, you know, it's this translation. But actually, a lot of things are lost in translation when we translate from our language to English. Our language is an ecologically based language. The names of the animals and the plants are the verbs that they do, the verbs that they exemplify through their lives. And so Tla-o-qui-aht doesn't just mean wolf. It is like the word kwa that is in Tla-o-qui-aht I've found in other words, and some words that I've found is like kwatsamis, which is our responsibility. It's the things that we need to do to make things right in this world. So we have a really, really old relationship with wolves. One of reciprocity, where we respect one another, where we learn from them, and they help to keep the natural balance of the lands that support our lives.
Wow, thank you. I'm sure there's going to be more of that, and that's really quite. It's interesting. I find it kind of interesting that we have two language specialists tonight, and I'm so curious about hearing more about like what we can learn from just even the language that you can share with us about wolves. So Gabe, I'm also curious to hear, like, I know a little bit more about your nation just through like living in this place. I'm kind of curious if you're open to also like sharing a little bit about what the wolf means for you or for your community.
Sure. And thank you, Gisele, for hearing your language. Makes me feel warm and good, and for sharing some of your teachings from your family. I know that it takes a lot of work to acquire those, and that you're sharing it with us means a lot. And I thank you for that. And our people here, our reserve is, as Ross said, is on the North Shore in Vancouver. But traditionally we lived all around the Burrard Inlet, and our word for Burrard Inlet was Tsleil-wat, and that's where our name Tsleil-Waututh comes from. So Tsleil-wat is our word for Burrard Inlet, and then ta that you put into Tsleil-wat is just one of our determiners. It's one of about 6 or 7 different ways I know of saying the in our language. It's the more common determiner. And osh is an attributive suffix. So Tsleil-Waututh, when you put that osh on a word, you're attributing that root word to something. And so to really properly qualify it, it would be Tsleil-Waututh Huelmuch, which translates as the Burrard Inlet attributed to the indigenous people, or the people of the inlet, as our elders translated it. But our family also descends from a wolf. And so in our Tla-o-qui-aht, in our stories, our first grandfather was transformed from a wolf into a young boy. And he journeyed all throughout. And they said that he learned from everything around him. And so as a human being, the plants, the animals, the water, they were all his teachers. And our first grandmother came a few years down the road from that event, and she was born from the womb of the inlet, the womb of the ocean of Burrard Inlet of Tsleil. And so in our way of seeing it, it's like the ocean is our grandmother and the wolf is our grandfather. And we're very, in our community, we're very attached to that. I know my late grandfather, he wrote some poetry amongst other things. And one of the things he wrote about is how hard it was for him to see the wolf pushed out of our territories. Because like our reserves, and along with our neighbors in Musqueam and Squamish, we occupied lands in what's now, one of the biggest cities in Canada. And so when you walk down streets like Robson Street or you walk down Thurlow Street, know that those were actually trails that our ancestors used to hunt. And so we have a long memory on this land. And I hear that in my sister Gisele's words. We had mountains that we tied our canoes to during the flood as well. And and we remember the ice age, and we remember the melting that came. And there was a time in our history when everybody died off, and one of the babies that was not sick, it was disease, hit our people. And one of the babies that wasn't sick was wrapped in blankets and left upon a trail. And by then everybody in the village had died. And the Tla-o-qui-aht, the wolf, the mother wolf, Tla-o-qui-aht, she came and found this, and she was really curious and kind of nervous. She was smelling, and she realized how helpless that he was. And so she picked the baby up in her mouth and brought her back to her den. And she fed him, and she looked after him, and she protected him within the wolf pack from the young wolves. And he was weak and he needed a lot. And in time he grew to be strong, and he grew and he fit in with Tla-o-qui-aht, with the wolves. And he was nurtured and grew strong. And one day he was walking and he happened upon one of our villages, Tla-o-qui-aht, and it's the newcomers, the Hunitum, the newcomers call it the Belcarra Regional Park now. It's over like in Port Moody, Port Coquitlam, Belcarra, that area, Tla-o-qui-aht, and he found this village, but it was empty. And he saw the implements, he saw the tools, and he picked them up and he started using them, and he learned how to use these tools, and soon he was hunting for deer, and he was providing for the wolf pack, and his wolf family were astonished at what he could do. But there was something in his heart that was kind of longing for something, and he felt he needed to go away and leave Burrard Inlet in search of something. And so he left, and it was hard for his wolf family. And he went over the mountains, our people said. He went over the mountains and he was taken in. And we believe he was taken in by other wolf people. And it's like they taught him to be human. They would have taught him to be human. And eventually he was married off to a different clan. And he returned back to Tsleil, to Burrard Inlet. And he saw his mother when he came back, and he told her, "I'll never forget you and what you've done. And I will always honor you." And so it is that our people in Waututh, our ancestors said they would carve effigy of the wolf on their spoons, and they would display the wolf in many other areas. And I know for some of our families in their Tla-o-qui-aht, they have connections to the animals, but they protect that connection and they protect that knowledge to keep it strong and to keep it pure. But because of the agreement that we made with the wolf, that we would always show people who we are, that's something we continue to honor. And the wolf has been so important for our family. You know, everything was lost. There was over, you know, I think there's over 60 languages in Canada, and half of them are in British Columbia. So that's like over 30 distinct systems of law, of economy, of philosophy, of medicine, of science. All these cultures evolved in one place over thousands of years, and in a beautiful and strong way. Anthropologists dissect that, and they say that for people that didn't use agriculture, we became some of the most advanced cultures and civilizations. And it was the abundance of the land that really provided that wealth. And it was that abundance. And in our family, we saw many things. We saw the ice kill off some of our people. We saw the floods kill off some of our people. We had war here on the coast pre-contact. We had disease, you know, droughts, famine, all these things that happened to us over the years. And then 20 years before the first ship came into Burrard Inlet, our people were almost wiped out by the disease of the newcomers. 20 years before we saw the first European, we went from about 15,000 down to a couple of dozen. And our relatives from Musqueam came and helped with our funeral practices, helped to take care of that. And then the residential schools in my family, we you know, my grandfather's generation, they spoke at least 4 languages, some of them probably more. So like Hunkaminam is our language, that's the language I'm using. And they also spoke Squamish. My great grandmother was Squamish. And so after smallpox, we started to intermarry a lot with the Squamish Stalmach, the Squamish peoples. We became prevalent as Squamish speakers as well. And so, you know, my grandfather's generation, because of residential schools, you get to my father's generation, and his siblings, their generation, we had 1 speaker in our community. Because of the residential schools, my grandfather the language was beat out of him. Literally, his first day, he was beat for using the only tongue he knew. And then you get to my generation, there's no speakers. And we worked to revitalize Hunkaminam in our community for about 5 or 6 years, but it's a challenge because it's a large language family that goes from up in the Fraser Canyon and the Fraser Valley down into the lower mainland of Vancouver and across to Vancouver Island. And there's 3 main dialects: Hulkamelam upriver, Hunkaminam downriver, and Hulkaminam on the island. And in those dialects, there were many, many other smaller dialects. And so in our dialect, it's from like Langley to Vancouver, there's no fluent speakers left. We were working with one mother tongue speaker. She was 100 years old and she died about 5 years ago. Mm. And then so we focused on Squamish in the last few years because it's part of our heritage, it's part of who we are. And there's a thriving language of speakers on the North Shore. And so it created a dynamic learning environment. And we also recognize that in learning that Squamish, that Salish language, that it's going to give us a stronger ability to become fluent in Hunkaminam, which is part of a larger, older language family. It split off, thousands of years ago, but they come from the same roots. And I share this because all that we lost, all the suffering, all the trauma, our parents went to these schools and the abuse came back home with them, and we suffered a lot. We didn't have rights under the Canadian laws. You know, we didn't have any legal rights when the refineries were built on our waters. We didn't have any legal rights when they wiped out all of our old growth forest. And with that, the wolves and the grizzly bear, coyotes, the elk. And it's like our spirit got so low. You know, I was born in 72, and I remember going to school and I felt ashamed of being Huelmuch. It's really weird to live in poverty, but be surrounded by one of the richest suburbs in all of North America. It's like being in a glass box, and you can see everything outside the box, but you can't leave it. And so we were put at such a disadvantage, and in many ways we remain there. But what gives me hope is when we started to stand up and speak for the earth again in a strong way, and when we started to bring back our language, that all of a sudden, and I want to pause where I'm at right now, because there's another story. The Tla-o-qui-aht is the blackfish, the killer whale. One of my ancestors, my great grandfather, could speak to all that lived in the ocean. And sorry, 1 second. And when he passed away, he was buried at an island near Tumtamuchtan called Poles. And the Juanitum, the newcomers, came and said, "We have to move you. You have to move your ancestors' remains off there." And so they paddled him. Was to test at the Snuckwash. And so when they boarded him in the canoe and paddled to where our little village is today, where the blackfish came beside the canoe and escorted my ancestor, Waututh. And Waututh, in his lifetime, he told all the fish to leave Burrard Inlet once, because he heard that the white fishermen were going to come. And another time he told the salmon to leave one of our rivers because two little boys were killing them. And so when those killer whales came and the canoe beached at our village, the old people said, my late Uncle Joe Thomas, his grandfather was there on the beach watching. And he said that they didn't go under and they didn't turn around. He said they backed out of Burrard Inlet. And then our old people said they never came back after that. When Waututh's son, Gus Denny, died, killer whales came in. And when my grandpa died, killer whales came in the inlet and then they left. That was in 81. 93 or so, my grandfather's brother, Patty George, he died and the killer whales came in and left. But we never saw them. And I was sharing this story with one of my friends, and he from Snuneymuxw, Thomas Jones, who's a language mentor for me as well. And he said, you know what, one thing that happens when those animals lose their friend, their heart breaks and they can't go back and be reminded. And so we lost all of that. And so when we started bringing back our language and we started standing up for the earth again, and we started to take care of our people in a good way, and we started healing, then in the last 3, 4, 5 years, the blackfish came back. They managed to come back to Burrard Inlet, overcoming many things. And now they come in, the transient, they call them transient in the Juanitam understanding. They come in now to Burrard Inlet. And it's the same time that the language came back, same time that we started to talk about our earth and how important it is and how alive it is. And it's all connected. It's all connected. And when one of my teachers from Waututh, Cowichan from Halalton, Cowichan, Thomas George. It's a different George family. He said, you watch, Gabe, he said, the killer whales are coming back in here. And he said, when they get to the river, they're going to turn into wolves. And then a couple years later, we had our, just this past Christmas, on Christmas Day, we caught, our trail cam caught a footage of Tla-o-qui-aht of a wolf. And so it's all connected when you want to work with our people, the land, the language, and the animals. It's all one in our understanding. And I apologize if I'm talking too long. But that's where the Tla-o-qui-aht is so important to us. And part of why Tla-o-qui-aht returned up, and we refer to it as Indian River Watershed. So if you go up Burrard Inlet, then it kind of makes a turn and it turns into what the newcomers call Indian Arm, but that's all one word for my people, Tsleil. And there's a valley up there. And we called that river Waututh, Stotlo, in that river. So we helped to reintroduce elk up there, coyotes. And so with that, Tla-o-qui-aht came back, the wolf. And my son went out with one of his brothers. In our family, we don't have a word for first cousins. So his first cousin is his brother. He went out with his brother and his uncle, my brother-in-law, and they harvested an elk. And they do it in a very traditional, spiritual way. And they're being groomed by my brother-in-law, both of them, to hunt with our values and our practices. And it will provide sustenance for our ceremonies and our family. And that's, I'm going to stop there because I don't want to, I'm not purposely trying to monopolize any time. I respect that there's, but I thank you for allowing me to share some.
Gabe, it's amazing what you share. So I'm, if anything, I want to apologize for the fact that we try and squeeze such a big conversation and set of knowledge and story into such a small space of time. And I love the way that you're able to. It's funny, I jotted down some questions and some ideas, and you've covered just about everything I could think of to ask and so much more. Right? I actually remember, it's Cyrus that we took out on the vessel in Burrard Inlet so many years ago. It seems like many years ago when I first met you, and I know I saw that picture on your Facebook. It was amazing to see him and him harvesting on your territory, and that was cool to see. So I love the way that you shared so much in those stories. And Gisele, I'm kind of curious because in a similar way, it's so powerful, Gabe, to hear you talk about, I was reading your grandfather's poem about the loss and the grief of losing the wolf, right? And how that relates to so much more that's been lost. And so Gisele, I'm kind of curious about what you might be able to share about in your community. It seems like there's a lot of work that is also around coexistence with wolves, right? And there has been conflict, it seems, in with humans and wolves in different ways in your community. And I'm kind of curious if you could share more about what your language or what your knowledge teaches you about the coexistence with wolves in a place like your territories.
Gabe. Thank you, Gabe, for sharing your stories. I'm still learning. It's a lifelong process. So I don't know what I might say today that I might look back on in 5 years or 10 years and be like, oh, I could have said this instead or whatnot. But I feel really that right now we are in a time of early contact. People often think of colonialism, early contact happening when Captain Cook first arrived on our coast or when Columbus landed several hundred years ago. But when I think about the time span of our knowledge, of our history, of our cultural lifeways and how they've been carried out, which spans thousands of years, British Columbia is only turning 150 years old next year, and that's a tiny piece of time. So when I look at it that way, I think we are still in early contact right now. And that's why a lot of people don't speak our language. That's why there's so much chaos. That's why there's so much conflict and misunderstanding. The wolves are our relatives. All life forms are non-human relatives that are part of the family of life. And I think a lot of the conflict comes from the idea of division that's been introduced with colonialism. English language is really good at categorizing, but not, I'd say the strength is not in seeing the interconnections of things. Our family has, actually, I have a picture here. Pictures. So this is a picture of some of my family, my late grandfather who put up these poles back in the 1980s, back in the 1900s. This one is a pole that was a memorial pole put up for one of my great aunts. And you can see a kakawin, an orca whale right here. This one is a pole about our constitution, our laws. And the very bottom figure is a Coexistence, a wolf. And these are considered the same, actually, the Coexistence and the wolf. They are one creature. There's a story that when the wolves have achieved a balance on land, they can go to the ocean and magically transform into orca whales and vice versa. And so Indigenous nations on West Coast Vancouver Island are one of the only nations that were known for whale hunting, like actually actively whale hunting in canoes 20 miles out on the open ocean. And we would trade that oil. There was incredible trade networks all across this continent, but we traded oil and canoes. Those were big things, and dentilia shells. But one whale that we never hunted was the orca. Orca have right of way. Same with wolves. Even today, some of the hunters in our communities, when they're out hunting, if they find out that there happens to be wolves that are after the same deer or the same elk or something, back off and go home. Let them have the right of way. They are the law keepers of the land. When the wolves come through our villages, I live on Long Beach, and actually I woke up 2 mornings ago from a wolf howl. It was so beautiful. It was like, I wanted to sleep in, but I'm so glad this wolf woke me up. But when the wolves do come through our villages, they get the right of way. We retreat inside, we give them privacy, we give them the quiet space that they need to go through. And I found that even the one res dog, my dad doesn't like the term Indian reservation. He says, these are our villages. They're much older than Indian reserves. Don't call them that. But, there's this stereotype of a res dog. So even that dog, like, she might let out one little woof, and then she retreats and she hides inside of her dog house, and the wolves have the right of way. And that's how it should be. And that's how it needs to be. Wolves have very important work to do, and they always have. They were the first ones who took care of the fire. They had the responsibility that we have to learn from. So I think, there's a lot of conflict in this time of early contact between completely different worldviews that have incredible dichotomy. In some of the old Christian stories, there's this story of Adam and Eve in a garden, and they're meant to go out and use everything, and that's their right, and go and use and populate. It's almost the opposite in our stories. Like, we are adopted by the family of life. It does not come from a use-centric point of view. We have a responsibility and a role to them. And I think that's kind of parallel to this idea that humans are bad for the planet. And I used to believe that as well. I used to speak like that, along with terms like wilderness, which I no longer use. There's this idea a lot of people talk about, like, oh, humans are terrible, we're destroying the earth. And in some ways there's some truth to that. I joined the voluntary human extinction movement some years ago. I was so annoyed with humans in general. But as I've learned our language, it has completely changed how I understand our home, and even how I understand myself. And one of the things I've learned is there's these words that exist in English that don't exist in our language, like wilderness. Wilderness is a wild place humans might visit, but do not live in and do not take care of, or it's a wasteland. And according to that word, that definition, which you can Google for wilderness, there is no wilderness here. Actually, there's no wilderness on this continent anywhere I've been so far that I've met Indigenous elders from. We have incredible roles as humans in the family of life. We had forest guardians. Every area of the forest had forest guardians. Every stream and river had a river keeper. There were beach keepers. There were people who took care of the offshore fishing banks, people who took care of the estuaries, the clam gardens, all those things. And a lot of those caretaking teachings that our guardians had, a lot of it is connected to the teachings of the wolf. It comes from the example that the wolf lives and that the orca whale lives on this planet. So yeah, it's really heartbreaking to think about the loss of things. And I began being interested in our culture when I was really young. My mother stopped me from watching television. We didn't have one. She used to cover my eyes when I was a baby. If we went to someone's house and there was a TV, she'd actually block my sight so I couldn't see the TV. And I'm grateful for that. But like being interested in our culture, in our stories, I visited one of our late elders, Mary Hayes, sometimes when I was 16, 15 years old. And I wanted to learn about plants, and sometimes she didn't know the answer, you know, or I'd want to know, like, what about rites of passage for young women? Or what about songs? What about this? And what about the names of the constellations? Like, who has that? You know, sometimes I couldn't find the answer, or she'd say, oh, that was lost, or not lost, but we don't have it right now. And I got really mad. And at the same time, I was finally learning about the Indian Act of Canada and what Indian residential schools were and what had happened to my family and why we are the way we are today. And I just got filled with a sort of despair. And I went to see her once and I was really bummed out. I was really sad about the loss of our culture, the loss of our language, the loss of all these things. And she said to me, don't worry, as long as we can protect the plants and the animals, as long as we can protect the spirit of the place, we can relearn directly from them, because that's where our culture comes from. That's where our language comes from. Around that time was also when the Clayoquat protests were happening here, which was some of the largest peaceful disobedience in Canada at the time in 1993. A lot of protesting to stop the logging, which in turn, you know, that protects the wolf. And that's something that our traditional forest guardian, they did as well. We didn't just willy-nilly go into the forest and cut huge timbers for giant canoes. Some of these canoes ranged up to 120 feet long. We didn't just go in there and cut any old tree for a totem pole or cut planks out of a living tree for our houses and leave. The forest guardians that were there had there's a lot of protocols and laws that we carried out. And one is never, ever disturb an area or a site within hundreds of meters if there's a wolf den or a bear den or an eagle's nest. Also, don't do any disruption in the forest while the birds are nesting. You know, and there's like all these different teachings, layers and layers of them. And once an area, if timber had been taken out of an area where there were large trees for planks or carving canoes, we would not return to that same site and collect any more wood for a period of 175 years to 250 years. That was our forestry turnover rate, which is a far cry from the BC Forestry Practices Code of today, who has that concept that we didn't practice agriculture. But actually, we've got these incredible roles of caretaking of the forest, but it wasn't use-centric and it wasn't human-centric. It was for all life. It was for maintaining that balance. And those lessons come directly also from the wolf.
Wow. Yeah, that's... You've kind of stumped me. So there's so much to take in from the lessons of what you share. And one of the... I know we've got a few questions, but I kind of want to just keep the time to hear from both of you. And I think we will respectfully to the audience, and we can try and do our best to answer the questions later. But I'm also curious, like we're getting towards the end of our time, and you both kind of, or Gisele, definitely that question really answered part of a piece that I wanted to open out at the end is, like, I guess it's no coincidence that we have two language experts here, right? And that's such a thread of tonight, and such a wealth of learning. And because one of my questions was about, and to hear from both of you, like, I feel conservation is changing rapidly. Like, Gisele, I totally hear what you're saying about that. You still feel we're in this, like, we're in early contact, right? And the scale of things, of time and so on, this is still the beginnings of, you know, different peoples coming together and meeting and so on and so forth. And there's challenges with that. And with, you know, with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, with the province looking at that, and so much of what's happening, and climate change accelerating everything, and the need to address these challenges. I'm curious to hear from both of you, is like, what can we learn from not just the wolf, but from your own language about like, what can conservation groups perhaps, and I asked that partly as a question of learning for Raincoast, but also for other people who are either interested in, you know, as a conservation organization, or interested in just supporting conservation efforts as a member of the community. What could we do better? Like, what I'm kind of curious about, maybe what could we learn from language in terms of how we might support efforts that are led by the nations? That's a bit of a convoluted question, but I'm just kind of curious about what you think that we can, as an audience or individuals, how might we become more aware of the teachings of your language?
I attended a conference in California a few years ago. I forget what it was called. Maybe it was the George Wright, or maybe it was a different one, but it was mostly park employees, park managers from United States, Canada, and Mexico. And there was one, it was said more than once, actually, there's more than 20 different definitions of what conservation means. So it differs from park to park, and that is a little bit problematic. You know, yeah, I don't know. I think I think supporting language is really important, because our languages are ecologically based. There's nothing that can replace that. There's so much traditional knowledge inside of our languages, which really, when it compared to English, English is an ecologically illiterate language. And to use an ecologically illiterate language to try and manage a territory that is barely understood is kind of, I don't know, preposterous. So whatever we can do to support that strengthening of language, Indigenous language, culture, and caretaking of the land. You know, those three things, whatever we do to help support one supports the others, because they're all interconnected, like Hishuk, Ishtzawak, everything is one. I know at home where I come from, I'm working also as a tribal park guardian. Tla-o-qui-aht Tribal Park those are just English words that we've chosen to try and communicate to the rest of the world, that continued intergenerational caretaking we have of our territory. And we've now invited businesses that are operating in our territory and individuals who visit what they think of as Tofino, British Columbia, which is in our territory in Tla-o-qui-aht Tribal Park. We've invited them to participate as Tla-o-qui-aht Tribal Park Allies in the Tribal Park Allies program. So there's a series of asks within that, and one of them is like to acknowledge the unceded rights and title of Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, to advocate for and accurately portray First Nation stewardship in all media, things like that, report territorial concerns like poaching, dumping to our guardians, help educate staff and guests about local history, politics, reconciliation, allies. But another one, you know, is really also to uphold our laws. And our most important law as I understand, is ESOC, which is often symbolized by the crest of the moon or the sun. And that is also on the top of this pole, which speaks about our Constitution again. There's a moon here. The wolf is at the bottom. I don't know if you've ever heard that saying, like, oh, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, like kind of like a joke in business speak, like you're not very important. Actually, the bottom of the totem pole is the most important. It upholds the rest. So when I walk by in this village and I see the wolf at the bottom, it's a reminder like, hey, you, because we have many teachings from our family, from the wolf. And then I look up and I'm reminded of all these laws and things that I need to uphold. And the top one is Isak, and that's connected to the moon and the sun. Isak is often translated as meaning respect, but it's a verb. And it really is to be observant, to appreciate, and to act accordingly. And it's those three things combined together. And when we're being observant, not just with our eyes and ears and taking down data, but be observant with our hearts, be observant with our guts, and appreciate what we observe and act accordingly. And I think from that start, you know, maybe we can start to help move early contact into a more positive space, hopefully.
Yeah, much work to do. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. Gabe, I'm kind of curious, and I'm sorry, like I feel like sometimes I'm still like cutting you guys off a little bit, but I'm just wanting to make sure I kind of manage the time as best I can. So Gabe, I'm kind of curious if like how, like what else might we learn from your language about how we might better just respect the places in which we live?
No, I you know, Gisele, I really appreciate your insights and you know, what you shared in regards to this question and everything that you shared. It's so important. And you know, I know like when we were doing our language work, it felt overwhelming, like we weren't going to succeed. And I remember one of my coworkers, he traveled out to New Zealand because of his interest in language work, and he met an elder there, and she said that any little bit that you add to the language makes a difference to the whole. And I think that the same goes for this work of the environment, of the animals, of the lands. And the other thing that really, when there's a term in our language, tameok, and that word means great grandparent, or it can mean great grandchild. So like, you know, me, then let's say like my dad, and then like, you know, there's me, my dad. So it's that's 7 generations, 7 generations. And that word, the root of that word from our language is tamuch. And tamuch means earth in our language. And so my great grandmother or grandfather is Tameok. And to them, I am Tameok. And so there's a connection through 7 generations. And that root word is land. And interestingly, in Squamish, it's Tameok Eok. It's got an extra vowel in there, Tameok Eok. And in Hunkaminam, it's Tameok. But interestingly, I was talking to one of my friends who's a Squamish, really good with Squamish language, and I worked with him for quite a while. Eok is actually the suffix for the top of the head. And I said, that's interesting because my dad's grandmother said that the spirit comes through the top of the head. And so that, just that word alone, it tells you like we are part of the earth, you know? And it's a recognition of the spirit that we carry as well. And that this skin and bones is just borrowed. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so many teachings. I'm kind of, we've got a couple of minutes left here. I do want to like just acknowledge people's questions and say we'll do our best to maybe get to them afterwards. But I think it just makes sense to, when we have the privilege of having guests like Gabe and Gisele, that we make the time to listen to them. And I'm kind of curious, like sometimes, you know, like Raincoast is a conservation group, a charity, we're often doing fundraising and doing XYZ. I'm kind of curious if there's like, what you both shared is very, very powerful and profound. And, like I hope people, even if they're on this call, will listen to it again and consider it. I definitely will. I'm also curious if like there's somewhere where either of you would send people like a project that they should support, or somewhere they can just go and learn about your community or your language. Like maybe that's too simple an ask, but I'm just kind of curious if either of you were to encourage people to go and learn more and become more aware of support an initiative, what might that be?
We have a Tla-o-qui-aht Tribal Park page, also a Tla-o-qui-aht Tribal Park Allies page. And the Tribal Park Allies page is pretty new, and we are still just getting a lot of businesses signing up right now, but hopefully as we grow and as we're able to actually fund positions of guardianship, we'll be able to present more things for the public also, and maybe events. Because there's that question is in a lot of places, like, how can we learn more? How can we learn more? And it's like, so we're in the process right now of like creating short stories, memes, videos, but that's probably going to expand quite a bit over the next few years. So you can follow those on social media. I'll write maybe the name in the chat box.
Yeah, and we can make sure that we share that information directly with the guests and other people as well, for sure.
Great.
Gabe, how about you? Is there like, I know that there's lots of some numerous initiatives around language revitalization. I'm curious where you might point people toward.
Yeah, growing up and sitting with like my elders, it's probably appropriate for me to acknowledge one of my late uncles, my uncle Bobby George, and my dad really spent a lot of time with me, especially my uncle. He'd come down weekly and talk for hours, and I didn't know I was going to school, and so I didn't know I was getting educated and getting this training and this gaining this way of being that they would say in our language. And what I find today is it's harder to pass that on to the next generation. And it's probably, a credit to how strong my uncle and them were with teaching, but it's also a credit to how much more distraction there is for our people and our kids. And so I found that getting that cultural, trying to cook people in our culture is a challenge, but the language has really accelerated that. It's like we brought the youth in our language work almost right away. All the people that I hired were youth from my community, and to see how it's transformed their lives has been amazing. So if you can support Indigenous language, it's a huge thing. For me personally right now, I think my answer is, how can you help? Well, because of COVID, we're not a huge community. I think we're on reserve about less than 400. I think we're around the 600 mark. Because of COVID, probably 90% of our parents didn't want to send their kids back to the public school. And we have a certified school in our community that was running with high school, grade 8 to 12. And because of COVID and parents not wanting to send their kids to school, that we've expanded just in the last few weeks from kindergarten to all the way up to grade 12 now. And so we're trying to find space, and it's outdoor based learning. There's postings out right now. If you check the Tsleil-Waututh Nation website, they're interviewing people. So any support towards that would help right now, like immediately. Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, I'll follow up with. There's some things that Raincoast are doing that might help with that, and I can communicate with both of you, and if there's anything else that we can share, we will do that, and we'll share that with this audience. We're a couple of minutes over, but that's fine.
I can give you Angela's George her contact information, Ross. She's the director that oversees our education.
Yeah, okay. I'll reach out and we can share both those things in the website. And I guess just in closing, I just want to. I kind of feel awkward in doing this, but Gabe, you kind of taught me part of this. I want to raise my hands to you, both of you, like in respect and appreciation of your time and your teachings. Like I feel emotional saying that, and I feel it, but I know that that's telling me that what you're teaching me is profound, and I should listen and take time, and that's what I'm going to do. And we'll make this recording available, and so people can hopefully share it and pass on this learning. And yeah, I just want to appreciate the fact that people have taken their time tonight to join us and ask questions. And I'm sorry we never got to them all, but I think it's better to, when we have people like yourselves on, to listen to you as much as we can. So yeah, I raise my hands to both of you, to our audience, and thank you. We're going to share some more information. We'll make this available, and we'll share those links about the Tribal Pack Allies program, and also about what your community is looking for support with, like right now, Gabe, in terms of COVID and education. We do have a final episode next week that's all about conservation of wolves in British Columbia, and also will fittingly, I think, also be dedicated to Chester Starr from the Healthsick Nation, who's really been our guide at Raincoast in terms of the work that we do. So we'll share more information with that. And yeah, maybe I'd pass over to either of you if you have any last message to our audience before we close. I'd invite you guys to share it if you feel that's appropriate.
Oh gosh. I hope there's a way to read all the comments before the Zoom disappears, and I just scanned the questions really quickly. There's a lot that I can't personally reply to, like they are meant for other nations specifically. Like Gabe said, there's an incredible diversity of just languages in this part of the world. Like west coast of this continent is very, very diverse. These are just some of the language groups. It doesn't even include like the languages within the languages. So like among Nuu-chah-nulth, West Coast Vancouver Island, we've got 14 different dialects or languages, and to me they're as different as French, Spanish, and Italian, and so they should be called different languages. So many different ones, but we each are connected to the places we come from and reflect those ecologies. They're very, very intimate. So I can't speak on behalf of all the other nations. But I want to thank you so much for having me here and being able to share a platform with an amazing person, Gabe. And I really, really treasure the opportunity to learn from other culture keepers and elders and be able to see the strengths that we share. And yeah, thank you. Tla-o-qui-aht.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said earlier, thank you as well, Gisele, for your knowledge and your understanding. And I know that kind of understanding and knowledge, it comes from being on the land, and I can feel it when you talk. I can feel it in your words, and much gratitude. And I think because I started with a song, I'm not going to say any more, but just end it with a song. And this is one of our wolf songs. Oh, hello, oh, hello, oh, hello, oh, hello, oh, oh, hello, oh, hello, oh, hello, hello, oh, hello, hello, again. That was
Mm.
Tla-o-qui-aht is our wolf song, one of our old family songs. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you all and everyone else. I can't think of a better way to end. So thank you. Good night to everyone. Take care. Thank you very, very much.